In this video, part 2 of my series on winning with smart tariffs, I want to show you how you can maximize the amount of money you can save or even make with template smart tariffs, like Octopus Flux here in the UK. And there are a couple of surprises in store. Stay with me and I'll show you what's going on. Hi, I'm Gary and welcome back to my channel Gary Does Solar. This is the second of 4 parts in the series Winning with Smart Tariffs. In part 1 we set the scene for the series, and if you missed it, I recommend you watch that first in order to get the best out of the series. It's only 10 minutes long and I've put a link in the description. In this video we'll be concentrating on the template style tariffs in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you live in the Southern Hemisphere, don't worry, the next part of the series is for you. But you should still watch this one as the decisions and actions that you will take are very similar. This is what a template style time of use tariff looks like for an energy customer in the Northern Hemisphere. The red line is the price you pay for imported electricity at that specific time of day, and the green line is the price that you will receive for any exported electricity, again depending on the time of day. There is typically, but not always, an off-peak period for import and export during the early morning. During this period, import rates are reduced, but so are export rates. And there may also be a peak period in the early evening. During this period, import rates are higher, and so might also the export rates. In order to start looking at strategies for this kind of tariff then, we need to break the 24-hour period into 4 separate stages, starting with the off-peak period. We'll call this Stage 1. Stage 2 will be the period between the off-peak and the peak periods. And it's during this period that we can expect to generate electricity, as this is when the sun shines. Then Stage 3 will be the peak period itself, and there might still be some solar generation happening at this time. And finally, Stage 4 will be the time from the end of the peak period all the way to the start of the off-peak period on the next day. By the way, please can you take a moment just now to hit the like button, as it really does wonders with the YouTube algorithm so that more people can benefit from this video. Thank you. Okay, so now that we've identified the different stages, let's choose a real smart tariff that we can use to build our strategies with. And here in the UK where I live, we have an incredibly forward-thinking energy provider called Octopus Energy. If you're not already with them, I highly recommend you switch in order to take advantage of their constant innovation. Their service is very, very good and I trust them. And what's even better is that they will credit you £50 if you sign up using my referral code here. And by doing this, you'll be directly supporting my work on this channel, as I will also receive £50. A huge thank you to all of you who have already switched to Octopus Energy using my code. Your support means a great deal to me. Now, one of Octopus Energy's smart tariffs is called Octopus Flux, and we'll be using this tariff for our strategy analysis, particularly for the summer months. Here is that tariff with all the import and export rates where I live for each of the stages. Now, before we determine the strategies for this tariff, let's recap on all the actions we can take with our solar and battery installation, and you might remember these from part 1 of the series. In that video, I discounted this first action because it would happen automatically anyway, and I also discounted this action for the same reason. Then I discounted this battery action as it is a get-rich-quick scheme that doesn't always work well. That left us with 4 actions, which I then ordered in terms of the most profitable actions. Now, since that video and reading your comments, rather than me essentially making decisions on which actions are better or worse for you, I should just keep all of them in the frame. So I've done that here, and again I've put them in order of profitability, but this time using the rates for the Octopus Flux tariff. And I've rounded the numbers off to make it easier. In the first action, we're generating energy at no cost, which means we don't need to buy that same energy at the standard import rate of 27p later in the day. The second action is the same, except we're storing that energy temporarily in the battery. Now, we're ignoring the cost associated with using the battery for the moment, but don't worry, we'll be coming back to that soon. In the third action, we're exporting energy generated for free at the standard export rate of 16p. The fourth action is the same, except we're storing that energy temporarily in the battery. In the fifth action, we're buying energy at the cheap import rate of 16p, which means we don't need to buy that energy at the standard import rate of 27p later in the day, saving us 11p. The sixth action is the same, except we're storing that energy temporarily in the battery. And finally, with the seventh action, the get rich quick scheme, we're buying at the cheap import rate of 16 pence and selling it at the standard export rate of 16 pence, so no profit. Now there is the opportunity to sell that same energy at the peak export rate, earning us a profit of 10 pence per kilowatt hour, but this action would still be the least profitable. This ordering will be helpful to us then in determining our strategy throughout the day for whatever smart tariff we've chosen. Okay, back to the cost of using the battery then. If you've watched my last few videos, you'll remember that we were able to calculate a cost per kilowatt hour for using the battery, with a view to understanding how we get the best return on investment for the battery. So here are what the numbers look like if we include the cost of using the battery. Let's work with a cost of 12 pence per kilowatt hour, but that number may be different for your situation. So the costs for the first, third and fifth actions remain the same as no battery is involved. In the second action though, we'll be including a cost per kilowatt hour of 12 pence, which brings the profit down to 15 pence. In the fourth action, the 12 pence cost brings that profit down to 4 pence. And in the sixth action, you can see the cost of using the battery now causes a loss of 1 pence. And in the final action, the loss is even greater at 12 pence. So you can see that by including the battery costs, there is a slight reordering of the actions. For example, actions 2 and 3 have swapped places. Now I have to say, I've really been wrestling with the whole debate on whether to include the cost of using the battery in determining which actions to take. One viewer in the comments argued that the cost per kilowatt hour is really only valid for those who are looking to add a battery to their existing solar situation. And if that battery has already been purchased, then essentially that cost is sunk, and the only thing that counts now is how best to use it for the maximum profit, like the original order of this table, ignoring the cost of using the battery. Now I didn't agree with that comment at the time, but actually I've come round to it. If we've already purchased the battery, then that cost is already paid for, so our attention now should be to extract the maximum profit from it. So I'd much rather do action 3 as it is now instead of action 2, as it yields a greater profit. So let's swap back to the original ordering then, excluding the costs of the battery. Of course, we're not ignoring the cost of the battery, nor even the cost of the solar installation, because we'll be covering all of this in our ROI chart, which will be the subject of a future video. You can get a glimpse of what that chart looks like and how to calculate the ROI in this video here. My plan is to eventually create some kind of utility or spreadsheet that will help you track your solar and battery ROI in a very easy way. And if that's of interest to you, have a think about signing up to my Patreon, as this is where you can follow all of my utility development plans and even influence them. Okay, back to our actions then. For the remainder of this video, we'll base our strategy choices on the first set of numbers, but you are free to use the second set of numbers if you prefer. And although these numbers are based on the Octopus Flux tariff that we're analysing, you can of course substitute them for any of the smart tariffs available where you live. Okay, we're ready now to determine some strategies for templated smart tariffs. Here are the 4 stages that we'll be analysing again. And let's kick off with stage 1. At the start of the off-peak period, it's likely that the state of charge of your battery will be low, and of course there will be no solar generation at this time to charge it. It's also likely that the level of home demand will be very low at this time of the morning, a level we generally refer to as base load, the lowest level of power draw during the day. So in terms of strategy and the actions that you will take, you have a choice. You can do nothing and allow the battery to continue discharging to meet home demand during this off-peak period. Or you can force charge the battery, making good use of the cheaper electricity available at this time. You can then use that stored energy later in the day instead of having to purchase it then at a higher price. Or you might choose to export it later for an attractive export price. So if you do choose to force charge the battery, how long should you charge it for? In the summer, you might expect your solar generation to completely fill the battery, even if empty, so why spend money force charging it? But looking at it another way, if you do force charge the battery in the summer, it could be full by the time the sun comes up, and that means you'll start exporting excess solar generation to the grid straight away, earning you money. And if you don't force charge the battery and there's no sun that day, you'll have missed out on all that cheaper electricity. And what if your battery size is so large, or the charge rate of your battery is so low, that even if you force charge for all 3 hours of this off-peak period, it wouldn't fill the battery anyway? And do you really want to be looking at the weather forecast every day to determine if and by how much you should charge? You can see that already there are many questions to answer, and this is just stage one. We could do with some help here to answer those questions, and thankfully help is at hand. Here's a utility I developed recently called SolarAsma Pro, and it's available to my Patreon members, and it allows you to model a daily view of your existing or planned solar and battery installation. The idea of using a model is straightforward. Rather than trying to determine what might happen with various strategies in your head, you can simply try them all out quickly and easily with this utility to see which of your strategies are going to be the most effective. To show you how it all works, I've set up a solar and battery installation at my location, comprising a single south-facing 5 kilowatt peak solar array and a 9.5 kilowatt hour battery. As you can see, the utility is already configured with Octopus Energy's UK Flux tariff, but you can set up any other smart tariff you like by adjusting the settings. And for the purpose of our analysis here, I'm using one of the built-in template daily usage profiles. This one has a base load of 200 watts throughout the day, then 2 peak usage periods, one in the morning and a larger peak in the evening. All in all, consuming 10 kilowatt hours over a 24-hour period. You can, of course, set up your own typical daily usage profile in the settings. For the moment, the sun has been turned off. This means we're having to import from the grid to meet all of our usage requirements, as there is no solar generation, and the total expenditure for this is £2.90, as you can see at the top right. Let's turn the sun on again to see what effect the solar generation we'll get has on that expenditure. We'll set it to 100%, simulating a bright summer's day. And as you can see, we've turned that expense into a profit of £3.81. More than that, there is still residual charge in the battery at the end of the day, which the utility values at £1.70 based on the standard import rate. This is just a notional value, however, and I've been discussing with Tim about this from Tim and Kat's Green Walk YouTube channel. Tim's suggestion was to model the second day to see how that residual energy in the battery would actually be used. And we can do this in the utility by pressing this button here, which sets the state of charge of the battery to the level it was at the end of the day, like so. By doing this, and because the battery state of charge is now the same at the start of the day as it is at the end of the day, we've essentially removed the notional value and turned it into real value. And here you can see that the overall income is actually £4.93 for that second day. I agree with Tim, this seems a much more practical way to look at the data. By the way, if you want SolarAsma Pro to show you the figures including the cost per kilowatt hour for the battery, this capability is available in the beta version, and it's very easy to use, as you can see here. Okay, so what actions can we take in stage 1 then to improve on that income? Here is a list of the actions open to us again. As there is no sun during stage 1, we can discount the first action. Indeed, we can discount the top 4 actions. Action 5 remains, but is of course automatic. Action 6 is open to us to charge the battery with the cheaper energy available during this period for use in the home later when energy is more expensive. And finally, Action 7 is also open to us to charge the battery with cheap energy, but to then export it later on. As we're in stage 1, we don't need to decide between the two actions yet, we only need to charge the battery in readiness. So let's do that now by force charging the battery from 2 AM to 5 AM. With a maximum charging rate of 3.6 kilowatts for this battery, you can see the battery state of charge steadily rises from 2 AM and reaches 100% after the 3 hours. There's a great deal of residual charge left in the battery at the end of the day, so to remove this, we'll model the second day as before, like so. This results in an overall income of £4.93. But hang on, that's the same income as not force charging the battery at all. Let's turn off the force charging again to check. Yes, it is the same. So on a sunny summer's day with the Octopus Flux tariff, it doesn't seem to matter if you force charge your battery or not during the off-peak period. But what if it's not so sunny? Well, we can model that right now. We'll turn off forced charging and set the sun to 50%. This results in a total income for the second day of £1.56. Let's now turn forced charging back on to see what the difference is. No difference. Okay, let's model a fairly bleak day then with only 25% generation. It's only a 9p difference, and that's only if the day is pretty bleak, which should not be that often during the summer. Finally, for stage 1, we should cover off the cheaper off-peak export rate. To me, that makes no sense to export at this time, given the low price paid in return. Okay, on to stage 2 now, the time between the end of the off-peak period and the start of the peak period. And it's during this period that we'll get some solar generation. Let's look again at the possible actions to see which ones are open to us during this stage. We can certainly power our home appliances with the solar generation, and this will happen automatically. And we can also store any excess solar generation in the battery if it's not already full, either for later use in the home or for later export back to the grid. Otherwise, if the battery is already full, we can export that excess generation back to the grid now. It's unlikely that we'll need to draw power from the grid if there's sufficient solar generation or battery charge, and it's unlikely we would ever want to charge the battery at the standard import rate for any reason. In our modelling then, if we didn't force charge the battery during stage 1, then any excess solar generation after meeting home demand is used to charge your battery, as you can see here from about 7 AM until it becomes full at around 11 AM. Then at that point all the excess generation is exported at the standard export rate. And if we did force charge the battery during stage 1, the battery is already full at the start of this period, so we could immediately start exporting that excess solar generation. The dip you see here at 7 AM is simply because we need to use some of the battery to meet baseload home demand until the sun comes up. Okay, let's move on to stage 3 now. But before we do, if you're getting a lot from my videos and you're in a position to financially support my work, educating everyone I can about solar, there's a great way that you can do this. I have my own Patreon channel, and on there you not only gain full access to SolarAsma Pro, the utility we're using in this video, but you'll also have the chance to ask me questions about solar on a regular Q&A video I host there. There's also a video about my own solar and battery installation, and you get the inside track on all the software utilities I'm currently developing, including the Google Solar API, the subject of a recent video I made. It's only a very small monthly fee, and a massive thank you to all of you who've already signed up. Okay, let's take a look at stage 3. And as you can see, it's during this stage we are paying the highest price for any imported electricity. But we're also achieving the highest price for any export we make. The sun is starting to set during this stage, so there is only limited solar generation potential. I say that, but if you have a west-facing solar array like my friend Dan has, then that's even better for Octopus Flux. Dan very kindly sent me some of his charts showing just how much solar generation he achieves during stage 3. I've marked in red when stage 3 happens, and you can see there's still a lot of solar generation available then. This is because with a west-facing array, the solar generation is skewed towards the right, which is great for tariffs like Octopus Flux. By the way, Dan runs the DanEVSolar channel on YouTube and regularly puts out videos on his experiences with both solar and EVs. His videos are well worth a watch, and I'll put a link to his channel in the description. Okay, let's look at our potential actions again, this time for stage 3. As there might still be solar generation at least at the start of stage 3, we can of course use that to power home appliances directly. And if we have more generation than the home requires, we can store it in the battery to power the home later on. And if the battery is full, we can simply export this excess generation at a lucrative rate. And with action 4, we can export the solar generation we stored in the battery during stage 2, again at a lucrative rate. We don't really want to power the home from the grid at this time given the high price for the grid import during stage 3, but we certainly would want to power the home using the cheaper energy stored in stage 1 if there's no further solar generation available. Finally, the get-rich-quick scheme might actually have a place here. given the wider spread between the Stage 1 import price and the Stage 3 export price. Okay, action 4 looks to be promising for us here. Let's see how that works in the model. If you remember, we're currently generating an income of £4.93 for the second day. Let's now force discharge the battery during Stage 3. That's from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Our income jumps to £5.53, not bad. Now this modelling was carried out on a very sunny day, but what if the weather's not so good? Does it still make sense to force discharge during Stage 3? Let's turn off the forced discharging and reduce the sunshine level down to 50%. You can see that, as expected, the export levels have reduced in line with the reduced solar generation, and this is bringing down our overall daily income to £1.56. But what happens to that figure if we force discharge once more? It increases to £2.15. Okay, let's turn off forced discharging again and reduce the sunshine level further, this time to 25%. Our income turns into an expense of 9p. But if we force discharge once more, that turns back into an income of 45p. So forced discharging looks to always boost our profit, regardless of the weather. Okay, let's quickly wrap up our analysis then of this tariff by looking at Stage 4. Here we're back to standard rates and there is generally no further solar generation. The strategy here is perhaps quite simple then, to ensure that your battery has sufficient charge to get you through to the start of the off-peak period the next morning. And here again is another reason to force charge your battery as much as possible during Stage 1 in case the weather on the day is not very sunny. And this might cause you to think about having a battery with enough capacity to at least cover your daily usage. So what conclusions might we make then about this particular tariff, Octopus Flux? It makes sense to force charge the battery during Stage 1, regardless of what the weather will be like, as it doesn't affect the daily income, at least for the battery size matching a typical daily usage. And it also makes sense to force discharge the battery during Stage 3, again regardless of what the weather is like, as this maximizes daily income. I'm not sure we could have reached these conclusions just by thinking about it in our heads, and that's the power of a modelling utility like SolarAsma Pro, that you can instantly see the financial effects of the actions you take based on your own solar and battery setup and also the tariff you're on. Again, you can get access to this utility by signing up to my Patreon, and by doing so you'll be helping support the work on this channel. Thank you. And if you want to know more about the tariff we analysed, Octopus Flux, I've made a detailed video about it here, and there's a link to it in the description. Okay, we've come to the end of part 2 of this series. There are still 2 parts to come. The next part will be strategies for solar sponge tariffs in the southern hemisphere, and the final part will be all about tracker tariffs where the price varies every 30 minutes. So please don't forget to subscribe in order not to miss any of these and a whole host of other videos I'm working on. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.